The gunshot that shattered the window of the general store sent Diana Crawford diving behind a water trough, her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. It was August 1878 in Lordsburg, New Mexico Territory, and she had arrived in town exactly 3 hours ago on the afternoon stage, hoping to start fresh after leaving behind a failed engagement in St. Louis. Instead, she found herself caught in the middle of what the locals would later call the Miller Gang's last stand. Diana pressed herself against the rough wood, splinters catching on her travel-worn blue dress as bullets whined overhead. She could hear men shouting, horses screaming, and the thunderous reports of rifles echoing off the adobe buildings lining the dusty Main Street. Her carpetbag lay abandoned 15 feet away where she had dropped it, containing everything she owned in the world. The irony was not lost on her that she had come west seeking adventure, and now all she wanted was to survive the next 5 minutes. The shooting intensified, and Diana squeezed her eyes shut, praying harder than she had in years. When she opened them again, she found herself staring at a pair of scuffed leather boots. Her gaze traveled upward to take in long legs clad in dusty denim, a gun belt slung low on narrow hips, a chain-brace shirt stretched across broad shoulders, and finally a face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. The man was young, perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of winter sage. "Stay down," he said, his voice low and steady despite the chaos erupting around them. He fired his rifle twice in quick succession, the shots so loud that Diana's ears rang. "When I say run, you head for that red building at the end of the street, the one with the forge out front. Do not stop, do not look back. Understand?" Diana nodded, unable to find her voice. The man fired again, then suddenly grabbed her arm and hauled her to her feet. Now she ran. Her boots pounded against the hard-packed dirt, her skirts tangled around her legs, and she half expected to feel the impact of a bullet at any moment. But then she was stumbling through a doorway into blessed dimness, and strong hands were catching her before she could fall. "Easy now," the man said, setting her gently on a wooden bench against the wall. "You are safe here." Diana gulped air, her chest heaving, and looked around. She was in a small house attached to what appeared to be a blacksmith's forge. The main room was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a few shelves holding supplies. Through an open doorway, she could see a narrow bed covered with a patchwork quilt. "Thank you," she managed, her voice shaking. "I thought I was going to die." The man removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair badly in need of a trim. Up close, he was handsome in a rough-edged way, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. A thin scar ran from his left eyebrow to his hairline. "James Kelton," he said. "I am the blacksmith here. You are new to Lordsburg." It was not a question. Diana straightened her spine, trying to gather some dignity despite her disheveled state. "Diana Crawford. I arrived on the stage today. I was supposed to meet Mr. Henderson at the hotel. He advertised for a housekeeper." James's expression darkened. "Henderson died 2 weeks ago. Heart gave out. I am sorry no one thought to send word." The words hit Diana like a physical blow. She had spent the last of her savings on the stage fare, counting on the promised employment. "I see," she said quietly, fighting to keep her composure. "Is there perhaps anyone else in town who might need help? I can cook, clean, mend, and I have a good hand with numbers and letters." Before James could answer, the shooting outside reached a crescendo and then suddenly stopped. The silence was almost as startling as the gunfire had been. James moved to the window, staying to one side as he peered out. "Looks like the marshal got them," he said. "The Miller gang has been causing trouble from here to Tucson for months, tried to rob the bank today." Deanna's hands were still trembling, so she clasped them tightly in her lap. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving her exhausted and overwhelmed. She had been traveling for nearly 2 weeks, and before that, she had endured the humiliation of discovering that her fiancé, Richard, had been courting her solely for her father's business connections. When her father's importing company had failed, Richard had vanished like morning mist, leaving Deanna with nothing but debts and shame. "You look done in," James observed, turning from the window. "When did you last eat?" "This morning. Some bread and cheese at the way station." He nodded and moved to the fireplace, where he stirred up the banked coals and added wood. "I will make us some supper. You can stay here tonight. Tomorrow we will figure out what comes next." Deanna knew she should protest. It was not proper for an unmarried woman to stay in a bachelor's home. But she was too tired to care about propriety, and besides, what choice did she have? She had perhaps $2 to her name, and the nearest town was a day's ride away. "That is very kind of you, Mr. Kelton," she said. "I will not impose on your hospitality any longer than necessary." "James," he corrected, pulling out a cast-iron skillet, "and it is no imposition. I do not get much company out here." Deanna watched as he worked, noting the efficient way he moved around the small kitchen area. He sliced bacon and set it to sizzling, then cracked eggs into the pan and cut thick slices from a loaf of bread. The domestic scene was oddly soothing after the violence outside. "How long have you been in Lordsburg?" she asked. 3 years. Came down from Colorado after my father died. He left me enough money to set up the forge." James did not look at her as he spoke, his attention focused on the food. "It is a good town, mostly. The railroad is supposed to come through in the next year or two, which will bring more business." "You have family here?" "No, just me." There was something in his tone that discouraged further questions on that subject. Deanna fell silent, studying him more carefully. There was a loneliness to James Kelton that she recognized because she felt it in herself. They were both people without anchors, drifting in their own ways. James divided the food onto 2 tin plates and brought them to the table along with cups of strong coffee. Deanna realized she was ravenous and had to force herself to eat slowly. The food was simple but good, and she felt some of her strength returning with each bite. "This is delicious," she said. "You are a better cook than I expected." The corner of James's mouth quirked up in what might have been a smile. "A man learns to take care of himself when he has to." They ate in companionable silence, and Diana found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. There was something solid and reassuring about James, a quiet steadiness that made her feel safe. When they finished, she insisted on washing the dishes while he went out to check on the situation in town. He returned 20 minutes later looking grim. "3 of the gang are dead, 2 captured. No townspeople killed, but the bank clerk took a bullet in the shoulder. Doc says he will live." James paused, running a hand through his hair. "I asked around about work for you. The widow Murphy might need help with her laundry business, but she cannot pay much. The hotel could use a serving girl, but the owner has a reputation for being free with his hands." Diana felt her stomach sink. She set down the dish she had been drying and turned to face him. "I see. Well, I shall simply have to manage somehow. Perhaps I can work at the laundry during the day and find somewhere to sleep that does not cost too much. The only boarding house in town is run by Mrs. Fletcher, and she charges 50 cents a night," James said. "On what the widow Murphy can pay, you would be sleeping in the street within a week." The truth of his words settled over Diana like a shroud. She sank into one of the chairs, feeling tears prick at her eyes. She had been so careful not to cry during the entire journey west, determined to be strong and independent. But now, Faced with the reality of her situation, she felt her resolve crumbling. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I should not have come west with such foolish hopes. I thought I could make a new life for myself, but I was naive." James was quiet for a long moment. When Diana finally looked up, she found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "You could stay here," he said slowly. "I could use someone to help with the house and cook meals. The forge work keeps me busy most of the day. I would pay you fair wages, and you would have room and board." Diana's first instinct was to refuse. It was scandalous enough staying one night. To actually live here would destroy her reputation completely. But what reputation did she have to protect? She knew no one in Lordsburg, and even if she did, what did it matter? She needed to survive, and James was offering her a lifeline. "People will talk," she said quietly. "People always talk. Let them." James's voice was firm. "You need work, I need help. It is a practical arrangement, nothing more." Diana studied his face, searching for any hint of improper intention, but all she saw was honest sincerity. She thought of the alternative, of the hotel owner with wandering hands or trying to survive on a washerwoman's pittance. James was offering her dignity and safety, even if it came with gossip. "I accept," she said, "and I promise you will not regret this kindness." James nodded once, as if the matter was settled. "You can have the bedroom. I will make up a bedroll out here by the forge. It will be cooler anyway with the heat from the coals." "I cannot take your bed," Diana protested. "You can and you will. I insist." His tone left no room for argument. That night, lying in James Kelton's narrow bed with the smell of wood smoke and leather around her, Diana stared at the rough ceiling beams and wondered what she had gotten herself into. Through the thin walls, she could hear James moving around, settling in for the night. She thought about the way he had pulled her to safety, the steadiness of his hands, the quiet kindness in his eyes. He was nothing like Richard, who had been all charm and pretty words with no substance beneath. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, Diana dreamed of gunfire and green-gray eyes. She woke to the sound of a hammer striking an anvil. Pale dawn light filtered through the single window, and for a moment, Diana could not remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back, the attack, James, her new situation. She rose quickly and dressed, smoothing her wrinkled traveling dress as best she could. In the main room, she found fresh water in the basin and evidence that James had already eaten breakfast. Through the open door to the forge, she could see him working, his shirt already damp with sweat despite the early hour. He was shaping a horseshoe, the rhythmic clang of metal on metal filling the air. Diana set about making herself useful. She found supplies and prepared a proper breakfast, then explored the house more thoroughly. It was clear that James had been living a bachelor's life. His few possessions were functional rather than decorative, and while things were relatively clean, there was a layer of dust and neglect that spoke of a man too busy working to care much about his living space. When James came in at midday, she had transformed the place. The floors were swept, the shelves organized, curtains washed and rehung, and a hot meal waiting on the table. He stopped in the doorway, looking around in surprise. "I hope I did not overstep," Diana said, suddenly nervous. "I thought since you were kind enough to give me employment, I should begin earning my keep." "No, it is good," James said. He removed his hat and wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "It has been a long time since this place felt like a home." They fell into a routine over the following days. Diana rose early to prepare breakfast, then spent her mornings cleaning, mending, and organizing. She proved to be an excellent cook, able to create satisfying meals from limited ingredients. In the afternoons, she would work on her own projects, altering her dresses to better suit the New Mexico heat, or reading from the small collection of books James kept on a shelf. James worked long hours at the forge, but Deanna noticed he always made time to check on her, to ask if she needed anything from the general store or if there was work that needed his stronger hands. He was unfailingly polite, treating her with a respect that Richard had never quite managed. The town gossip started almost immediately. Deanna encountered it on her first trip to the general store, where Mrs. Henderson, the former owner's widow, gave her a look of pure ice. "Living in sin with the blacksmith," the older woman said to her companion, though clearly intending for Deanna to hear. "And her barely in town a week. Shameful." Deanna held her head high and completed her purchases without responding, but the words stung. That evening, she mentioned it to James as they sat at the table after supper. "Mrs. Henderson called our arrangement sinful," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "I suppose I should have expected it." James's jaw tightened. "Martha Henderson is a bitter woman who has nothing better to do than spread misery. Pay her no mind. It does not bother you, the talk. I learned a long time ago that I cannot control what other people think." James met her eyes across the table. "I know the truth of things, and so do you. That is what matters." Deanna nodded, but she could not quite shake the feeling that she was damaging James's reputation along with her own. The thought bothered her more than it should have. She was growing fond of him, she realized. More than fond. She looked forward to their evening meals together, to the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was amused, to the sound of his voice reading aloud from the newspaper on Sunday evenings. It was dangerous to feel this way. Their arrangement was temporary, practical. James had offered her shelter out of kindness, nothing more. She would be foolish to imagine anything else. But as the days turned into weeks, Deanna found it increasingly difficult to maintain that emotional distance. James had a gentle nature beneath his rough exterior. He brought her wildflowers he found on his morning walks. He listened when she talked about her life in St. Louis, about her father's death and Richard's betrayal, and he never once made her feel weak for her emotions. One evening in late September, nearly 2 months after Deanna's arrival, a violent thunderstorm rolled across the desert. The rain came down in sheets, and wind howled around the small house. Deanna had been preparing supper when the storm hit, and she watched through the window as lightning split the sky. "I have never seen rain like this," she said as James came in from securing the forge. "Desert storms are fierce but usually quick," he replied, water dripping from his hair. "Though this one looks like it might last through the night." They ate supper to the sound of thunder, and afterward Deanna brought out the deck of cards she had found among James's possessions. "Do you play?" "Some. My mother taught me when I was young." They played several hands of rummy while the storm raged outside. Deanna found herself studying James in the lamplight, noticing details she had not paid attention to before. The way his hands, so strong and scarred from forge work, handled the cards with surprising delicacy. The small scar on his chin that she had never asked about. The way he seemed to relax in the evenings, the tension of the day's work slowly leaving his shoulders. "Tell me about your mother," she said during a lull in the game. James was quiet for so long that Deanna thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "She was from back east like you, Boston. She met my father when he was working on the railroad. Her family disowned her for marrying beneath her station. That must have been hard for her. She never complained. She loved my father truly, and he loved her. They had 15 good years together before she got sick. Pneumonia took her one winter when I was 12. James gathered the cards and began to shuffle them. "My father was never the same after. He did his work, raised me the best he could, but part of him died with her." "I am sorry," Deanna said softly. "It is clear they had something rare." "They did." James dealt a new hand. "What about your parents? My mother died giving birth to me. I never knew her. My father raised me, and he did well enough, but there was always a sadness in him too. I think he blamed himself for her death, though it was not his fault." Deanna picked up her cards without seeing them. "When his business failed, I think part of him was relieved. He died a month later, and the doctor said it was his heart, but I believe he simply gave up." "And then Richard," James said quietly. "And then Richard." Deanna's voice was bitter. "I thought he loved me, but he only loved what he thought I could bring him. When there was nothing left, he was gone." A particularly loud crack of thunder made Deanna jump. James reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "You are stronger than you know," he said. "Coming out here alone, starting over. That takes courage." Deanna looked down at their joined hands, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "I did not feel very courageous when you found me hiding behind that water trough." James's rare smile appeared. "You survived. That is what matters." They sat like that for a long moment, hands touching across the worn table while the storm hammered at the walls. Deanna felt something shift between them, a recognition of feelings that had been building for weeks. When James finally withdrew his hand, she felt the loss of his touch like a physical thing. The storm continued through the night, and Deanna lay awake listening to it, thinking about the man sleeping just beyond her door. She had come to Lordsburg expecting nothing but a job and a chance to rebuild her life. Instead, she had found something she had not been looking for. She had found a place where she belonged, and more dangerously, a person she was beginning to love. The next morning dawned clear and washed clean. Deanna rose to find James already up, standing in the doorway looking out at the transformed landscape. The desert had exploded into bloom overnight, with tiny flowers carpeting the ground in shades of yellow and purple. "It is beautiful," Deanna breathed, coming to stand beside him. "It happens after heavy rains," James said. "The seeds lie dormant until the water comes, and then they bloom all at once. It does not last long, maybe a week or two." They stood together watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, and Deanna thought about dormant seeds waiting for the right conditions to bloom. She wondered if the same could be true of hearts. Later that morning, a man rode up to the forge, leading a horse that was favoring its left front leg. Deanna recognized him as Tom Fletcher, owner of the boarding house and one of the few townspeople who had treated her with basic courtesy. "Morning, James," Tom called. "Got a horse that needs shoes, and I think he might have picked up a stone." James examined the horse's hoof, eventually extracting a sharp rock that had lodged in the frog. "I will have him fixed up by this afternoon," he said. "Much obliged." Tom glanced at Deanna, who was hanging laundry on the line James had strung for her. "Miss Crawford, my wife wanted me to invite you to church on Sunday. She said we have not been very welcoming, and that is not right." Deanna was so surprised that she nearly dropped the shirt she was holding. "That is very kind of Mrs. Fletcher. Please tell her I would be honored." After Tom left, James said, "You do not have to go if you do not want to. I know how some of them have treated you." "I want to go," Deanna said. "Besides, Mrs. Fletcher is making an effort. It would be rude to refuse." Sunday came, and Deanna wore her best dress, a dark green cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She had been in Lordsburg for 3 months now, and the desert sun had given her skin a golden glow that softened her features. As they walked to the small church at the edge of town, she was acutely aware of James beside her, freshly shaved and wearing a clean white shirt. The service was simple, led by a circuit preacher who came through once a month. Deanna felt eyes on her throughout, but Mrs. Fletcher made good on her invitation, sitting beside Deanna and introducing her to several other women. After the service, the congregation gathered outside, and Deanna found herself in conversation with Sarah Mitchell, the young schoolteacher. "I am glad to see you settling in," Sarah said. She was close to Deanna's age, perhaps 24, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "I hope the town gossips have not been too hard on you." "It has not been easy," Deanna admitted, "but James has been nothing but respectful. Our arrangement is purely practical." Even as she said the words, Deanna knew they were no longer entirely true. Her feelings for James had grown far beyond what was practical or wise. She loved the way he hummed while he worked, the care he took with injured animals, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. She loved the man himself, though she had not admitted it aloud. Sarah studied her with knowing eyes. Sometimes practical arrangements turn into something more. There would be nothing wrong with that. "He does not think of me that way," Deanna said quietly. "Are you certain?" Sarah glanced to where James stood talking with Tom Fletcher. "I have known James Kelton for 2 years, and I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Diana's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "Only that a blind person could see he cares for you." "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" The conversation stayed with Diana all through the following week. She found herself watching James more closely, looking for signs of the feelings Sarah had mentioned. She noticed the way his expression softened when he looked at her, the way he always made sure she had the more comfortable chair, the way he saved the best portions of food for her plate. Small things, but they added up to something significant. October arrived with cooler temperatures and brilliant blue skies. Deanna had been in Lordsburg for nearly 3 months, and life had taken on a comfortable rhythm. She had made a few friends among the townswomen, though some still treated her with disdain. She had also begun helping Sarah at the school twice a week, teaching the younger children their letters. One evening, as Deanna and James sat on the bench outside the house watching the sunset, he said, "You have made a real home here. I want you to know I appreciate it." "It has become home to me too," Deanna replied. "I never expected that when I arrived." "What did you expect?" Deanna thought about that. "Honestly, I had no expectations beyond survival. I just knew I could not stay in St. Louis. Every street corner reminded me of my failures." "Coming here was not a failure. You were brave." "I was desperate," Deanna corrected. "There is a difference." James turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Deanna, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to race. "What is it?" He seemed to struggle with the words. "These past months, having you here, it has changed things for me. You have changed things. I know our arrangement was supposed to be temporary, just until you could find other work, but I do not want you to leave." "I do not want to leave either," Deanna said softly. "I mean I do not want you to leave ever." James took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "I have feelings for you, Deanna. Strong feelings. I know it is not what you bargained for when you accepted my offer of work, and if you do not feel the same way, I will understand. But I had to tell you the truth." Deanna felt tears spring to her eyes. "James, I have been falling in love with you for weeks now. I was afraid to say anything because I thought you only saw me as an employee, someone to cook your meals and keep your house. You are so much more than that." James cupped her face with his free hand, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "You are the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing I think about before I sleep. You have brought light into a life that was all shadows. I love you, Deanna Crawford." "I love you too," she whispered. And then his lips were on hers, gentle at first and then deeper as 3 months of restrained longing finally found release. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, James rested his forehead against hers. "Will you marry me? Make this real and permanent?" "Yes," Deanna said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 2 weeks later in the same small church where Diana had attended her first service. Sarah stood up with Diana and Tom Fletcher stood up with James. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony, and afterward, the townspeople surprised them with a celebration in the town square. Even Mrs. Henderson managed a stiff congratulations, though her smile did not reach her eyes. That night, in the house that was now truly theirs, James carried Diana over the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Kelton," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have been home for months," Diana replied, touching his face. "I just did not realize it until now." Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. The forge work was hard and sometimes dangerous. Money was tight, especially during the winter months when fewer people needed blacksmith services. But Diana and James faced each obstacle together, their love growing stronger with each trial overcome. Diana continued teaching at the school, and James's business slowly grew as word spread of his skill and fair prices. They saved what they could, dreaming of the day when they might expand the forge or perhaps buy some land for horses. In the spring of 1879, Diana discovered she was pregnant. She told James over supper one evening, watching as shock and then pure joy spread across his face. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Diana asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not begin to cover it." James pulled her into his arms. "You have given me everything, Diana. A home, love, and now a family. I never thought I would have any of this." "We gave it to each other," Diana corrected. "You offered me shelter for one night, but you gave me a lifetime." Their son was born in December, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Michael James Kelton, and he had his father's steady temperament from the start. James proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle with the infant despite his large, work-roughened hands. The years that followed were full and rich. Diana and James had 2 more children, a daughter they named Catherine in 1881, and another son, Thomas, in 1883. The railroad finally came to Lordsburg in 1880, bringing prosperity to the town just as James had predicted. His forge became one of the busiest in the territory, and they were able to build a larger house with separate bedrooms for the children and a real parlor for receiving guests. Diana's relationship with the town improved dramatically after her marriage. She became known for her charitable work, helping new arrivals find their footing just as she had needed help once. She never forgot what it was like to be alone and desperate, and she made sure no one in Lordsburg suffered that way if she could prevent it. Sarah Mitchell became her closest friend, and the 2 women could often be found at the schoolhouse, working together to educate the growing number of children in town. When Sarah married a rancher named David Morrison in 1882, Diana stood up with her just as Sarah had done for Diana. James's reputation grew beyond Lordsburg. Ranchers from across the territory brought their horses to him, trusting his skill and integrity. He never lost his quiet, steady nature. But Diana noticed how fatherhood had softened something in him, filling in the empty places that had existed when they first met. On their 5th wedding anniversary in 1884, James surprised Diana with a beautiful mare, chestnut-colored with a white blaze on her forehead. "Her name is Sunrise," James said, helping Diana into the saddle. "I thought it was time you had a horse of your own. Maybe we could ride out to the desert together sometimes, like we used to when we were courting." Diana leaned down to kiss him, not caring who might see. "You are a wonderful husband, James Kelton." "I am a lucky husband," he corrected. "I found you and somehow convinced you to stay." As Diana rode Sunrise around the paddock, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The gunfight, the fear, the desperate uncertainty of those first days. If someone had told her then that she would find not just survival but joy, not just shelter but home, she would not have believed them. That evening, after the children were asleep, Deanna and James sat together on the porch of their house, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. This had become their ritual, these quiet moments at the end of the day when they could simply be together. "You ever think about that first night?" Deanna asked. "When you brought me here during the shootout?" "All the time," James admitted. "I think about how different my life would be if you had not been on that stage, if you had not needed shelter, if I had not offered it." "Do you think it was fate?" James considered this. "I think it was luck and choice. We were lucky to find each other, and we chose to take a chance on something that seemed impossible. Everything else followed from there." Diana nestled against his side, feeling the solid warmth of him. "I made a lot of mistakes before I came here. I trusted the wrong people, believed the wrong promises. But coming to Lordsburg, accepting your offer, loving you, those were the right choices." "The best choices," James agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. The years continued to unfold. Michael grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved reading and showed an aptitude for numbers. Catherine was fearless and funny, always leading her younger brother Thomas into some new adventure. The children thrived in the desert landscape, growing strong and tanned under the relentless sun. In 1886, James hired an apprentice, a young man named Robert Hayes who showed real talent for forge work. This allowed James more time with his family, and he made the most of it, teaching Michael to ride, building a dollhouse for Catherine with his own hands, and carrying Thomas on his shoulders around the property. Diana watched her husband with their children and fell in love with him all over again. He was everything Richard had not been, solid and true, a man whose word meant something. She thought sometimes about what her life might have been if she had married Richard, living in St. Louis society, and she shuddered. That life would have been a beautiful prison, all surface and no substance. This life, her real life, was messy and hard and absolutely perfect. One hot July afternoon in 1887, a familiar face appeared at the forge. Deanna was bringing James his midday meal when she saw the man, and she stopped dead in her tracks. It was Richard, looking older and harder than she remembered, his fancy clothes dusty from travel. "Deanna," he said, removing his hat. "I heard you were here. I had to see for myself." James appeared at her elbow, wiping his hands on a rag. His posture was relaxed, but Deanna could feel the tension in him. "Can we help you with something?" he asked coolly. Richard's eyes flicked to James and then back to Deanna. "I came to apologize for how I treated you, how I left when you needed me most. It was wrong, and I have regretted it ever since." Deanna studied the man she had once planned to marry. She felt nothing, not anger or pain or even curiosity. He was a stranger, someone from a life that no longer had any connection to her present. "I accept your apology," she said calmly. "But it does not change anything. I have a good life here, a real life with a man who truly loves me. I hope you find the same someday." Richard's expression crumbled slightly. "I heard you married a blacksmith. I thought maybe you settled because you had no choice, but I can see I was wrong. You are happy." "Happier than I ever was with you," Deanna said, not unkindly. "Goodbye, Richard." He nodded, replaced his hat, and rode away without another word. Deanna turned to find James watching her with pride in his eyes. "You did not need me to handle that," he observed. "No, but I am glad you were here anyway." Deanna took his hand. "He belongs to a different person, someone I used to be." That Deanna was lost and scared and did not know her own worth. This Deanna does. James pulled her close, heedless of the dirt and sweat from his work. "This Deanna is the strongest person I know. I am honored to be her husband." That evening, after the children were in bed, Deanna told James the whole story of her relationship with Richard, things she had held back before. She told him about the shame she had felt when Richard left, how she had believed for a time that she was unworthy of love. "He was a fool," James said fiercely. "He had something precious and he threw it away for money and status. I would choose you over anything in this world, Deanna." "Every single time." "I know," Deanna said, touching his face. "That is why I love you." The next decade brought more changes. The children grew, and Lordsburg transformed from a rough frontier town into an established community. New businesses opened, including a proper hotel and a second church. The railroad brought visitors and commerce, and the town prospered. Michael decided to become a lawyer, studying with Judge Harrison in town, and then eventually traveling to Santa Fe for proper education. Catherine surprised everyone by showing a talent for horses, working alongside her father at the forge and proving herself capable of shoeing horses as well as any man. Thomas was still young, but he showed signs of inheriting his father's skill with metalwork. In 1895, Deanna and James celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary. They were both in their early 40s now, their hair showing threads of gray, their faces marked by years of sun and wind and laughter. They sat in their usual spot on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. 16 years, Deanna mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever. Both, James agreed. I can barely remember what life was like before you. Quieter, I imagine, James laughed. Definitely quieter, also lonelier, emptier, and infinitely less interesting. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds of the desert. From inside the house came the sound of Catherine and Thomas arguing good-naturedly about something, and Deanna smiled. "We have done well, haven't we?" she said. "With the children, with this life we have built. We have done better than well. We have been blessed." James took her hand, a gesture so familiar after all these years that Deanna barely noticed it, yet it still brought her comfort. "You stayed, Deanna. You could have left 100 times, found something easier, something more socially acceptable. But you stayed and you gave me everything." "You gave me everything," Deanna corrected. "That first night when you offered me shelter, you saved my life. Not just from the bullets flying outside, but from despair and hopelessness. You reminded me that there are still good people in the world, people who help without expecting anything in return." "I got plenty in return," James said. "I got you." As the stars began to appear overhead, Deanna thought about the woman she had been on that dusty August day in 1878, frightened and alone behind a water trough. That woman would never have believed that fear could transform into this, into love and family and belonging. But life had a way of surprising you, of offering gifts when you least expected them. The years continued their steady march. Michael passed the bar exam and opened a law practice in Lordsburg, marrying a sweet-natured girl named Emma from Silver City. Catherine married Robert Hayes, James's former apprentice, and they took over the running of the forge when James decided to slow down. Thomas eventually became a teacher, working alongside Sarah Morrison at the school. Diana and James became grandparents, then grandparents several times over. Their house was often filled with the sounds of children playing, grandchildren who climbed on James's lap to hear stories about the old days, and followed Deanna around the kitchen learning to make her famous apple pie. In 1903, on a warm spring evening, James and Deanna took a ride out into the desert on horseback. They were both 61 years old now, their bodies marked by age but their spirits still young. They rode to a spot James had shown Deanna years ago, a small rise that looked out over miles of open land. "You remember what I told you about the desert flowers?" James asked as they dismounted. "How they wait for the rain and then bloom all at once." "I remember," Deanna said. "You said it does not last long." "I was thinking about that recently," James said, settling onto a flat rock and pulling Deanna down beside him. "About how brief the blooming time is. Our lives are like that in a way, brief and beautiful and all the more precious because they do not last forever." Deanna felt a flutter of concern. "Are you feeling all right? Is something wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right." James put his arm around her shoulders. "I am just grateful, that is all. Grateful for every moment we have had, every sunrise I woke up next to you, every meal we shared, every laugh and tear an ordinary day. If I had only one night with you, it would have been worth it, but I got a lifetime instead." "We got a lifetime," Deanna corrected, leaning her head on his shoulder. "And it is not over yet." They sat together watching the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors. After all these years, the desert still had the power to take Deanna's breath away. Or perhaps it was not the desert at all, but the man beside her, the life they had built, the love that had grown from a single night's shelter into something that would outlast them both. As darkness fell and the stars emerged, James and Deanna rode slowly back to town. The house was lit up when they arrived. Their children and grandchildren gathered for a surprise anniversary dinner. There was laughter and food and storytelling, the kind of warm chaos that comes from a large, loving family. Later, when everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Deanna and James prepared for bed with the easy familiarity of decades together. As they lay in the darkness, Deanna said, "That first night, did you know? Did you have any idea what would come of it?" "No," James admitted. "I just knew I could not leave you there in danger. Everything else was instinct. Good instinct, the best instinct I ever had." James pulled her close. "You stayed, Deanna. Despite everything, despite the gossip and the hardship and all the reasons you could have left, you stayed. That is the greatest gift anyone ever gave me." "Where else would I go?" Deanna asked softly. "You are my home, James. You always have been." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found each other in chaos and chosen to build something lasting from that moment of connection. The years that followed were gentle. James and Deanna grew old together, their love deepening rather than fading. They spent their days surrounded by family, watching their grandchildren grow and thrive. The forge passed fully to Catherine and Robert, and it continued to prosper under their management. Deanna remained active in the community, her charity work expanding to help not just new arrivals but anyone in need. She became known as someone you could turn to in times of trouble, someone who understood hardship and never judged. James often joked that she had helped half the territory at one point or another. In the spring of 1910, they celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary with a party that drew people from across New Mexico. The governor himself sent a letter of congratulation, praising their contributions to the territory and their exemplary marriage. As Deanna looked around at the gathering, at the children and grandchildren and friends who had come to celebrate with them, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She thought about the frightened woman who had arrived in Lordsburg so many years ago, expecting nothing but a job and perhaps a chance at survival. That woman had received so much more than she dreamed possible. James found her standing alone on the porch of the community hall, looking out at the darkening desert. "Hiding from your own party?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Just taking a moment," Deanna said. "Remembering. The beginning, all of it. Every part." She turned to face him, this man who had been her partner, lover, friend, and companion for more than 3 decades. His face was deeply lined now, his hair completely gray, but his eyes were still that same clear sage green that had looked at her with such kindness on that first violent night. "We have had a good run," James said. "The best," Deanna agreed. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the familiar lines and angles. "I love you, James Kelton. I have loved you since the day you pulled me to safety, and I will love you until my last breath." "And beyond that, I hope," James said, covering her hand with his. "I plan to love you into eternity." Inside, someone called for them, and they went back to join the celebration. But first, they shared a kiss in the gathering darkness. Two people who had taken shelter together for one night and somehow made it last a lifetime. Diana and James lived to see the territory of New Mexico become a state in 1912. They stood together in the crowd in Lordsburg when the news came through, tears streaming down both their faces as they realized they had been part of building something lasting. The rough frontier town where they had met had transformed into a thriving community, and they had played their part in that transformation. In 1914, at the age of 72, James became ill. The doctor diagnosed a weakness in his heart, saying there was nothing to be done but rest and prayer. Diana refused to accept this. She nursed him with fierce dedication, barely sleeping, coaxing him to eat, reading to him for hours. "You cannot bully death," James told her one afternoon, his voice weak but amused. "Watch me," Diana replied, and her determination was so fierce that James actually laughed. Against all odds, he recovered. Not completely, but enough to enjoy a few more years of quiet life. They spent those years doing the simple things they loved, sitting together watching sunsets, playing cards in the evening, visiting with their ever-growing family. They had 9 grandchildren now, and 3 great-grandchildren, a legacy that would carry on long after they were gone. On a cool October evening in 1918, James and Diana sat together on their porch. They were both 76 now, and they knew their time was growing short, but there was no fear in either of them, only gratitude for the years they had shared. "You have any regrets?" Diana asked. James thought about this seriously. "Only that we do not have more time, but I suppose everyone says that." "I regret wasting time with Richard," Diana admitted. "All those months I spent believing his lies when I could have been looking for something real." "But if you had not been with Richard, you would not have come west. You would not have been in Lordsburg that day." James squeezed her hand. "Every path you walked led you to me. I cannot regret any of it." Diana smiled. "When did you become such a philosopher? I have always been this way." "You just did not notice because you were too busy admiring my arms." Diana laughed, the sound rich and full despite her age. "I never said I admired your arms. You did not have to. I saw the way you looked at me when I worked the forge." They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun set on another day. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, but tonight they had this perfect moment of peace and love. It was enough. It had always been enough. James Kelton died peacefully in his sleep in November 1918, surrounded by his family. Diana held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering words of love that only he could hear. The funeral was the largest Lordsburg had ever seen, with people coming from across the state to pay their respects to the blacksmith who had helped build a community. Diana grieved, but not with despair. She knew she had been blessed beyond measure, and she carried James with her in every memory, every lesson he had taught her, every moment of love they had shared. She lived 3 more years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, telling stories about James so that the younger ones would know what kind of man he had been. She watched Michael's law practice flourish, Catherine's children take over the forge, Thomas's students learn and grow. She saw her grandchildren marry and start families of their own. On a warm spring night in 1921, Deanna Crawford Kelton died quietly in her sleep. She was 79 years old, and she died without regret, without fear, knowing she had lived a life full of love and purpose. They buried her next to James in the Lordsburg cemetery, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The whole town turned out for the funeral, mourning the loss of a woman who had touched countless lives with her kindness and strength. At the gathering after the service, Michael stood to speak about his parents. He was 62 now, a distinguished lawyer with silver hair and his father's steady gaze. "My mother once told me that my father offered her shelter for one night," Michael said, his voice carrying across the quiet room. "She was a stranger in a strange land, frightened and alone. My father could have turned her away, could have told her to find help elsewhere, but he did not. He offered her safety and kindness with no expectation of return. My mother stayed one night, then another, then another. She stayed because she found in my father something rare and precious, true goodness and honest love. And in staying, she gave my father the greatest gift, a full and beautiful life. They were married for 37 years. They raised 3 children, saw 9 grandchildren born and 3 great-grandchildren. They built a home and a family and a legacy that will continue long after we are all gone. But more than that, they showed us what real love looks like. Not the passionate intensity of young romance, though they had that too, but the steady, enduring love that chooses to stay even when things are hard. The love that builds something lasting from a moment of kindness. My father offered shelter for one night. My mother stayed and gave him a lifetime. And in doing so, they gave all of us a gift, the knowledge that love, true love, can transform everything." There was not a dry eye in the room when Michael finished speaking. Catherine stood and added her own memories, talking about how their mother had taught her that a woman could be both strong and gentle, that you did not have to choose between family and purpose. Thomas spoke about the stories their mother had told, about coming west with nothing and finding everything. As the sun set on that spring day, the family gathered at the graves of James and Deanna Kelton. The desert flowers were blooming, carpeting the ground in yellow and purple, those brief, beautiful blossoms that appeared after the rain and lasted only a short time. Catherine knelt and placed a bouquet of wildflowers on each grave. "They were brief and beautiful," she said, echoing what her father had once said about the desert blooms. "But their love was not brief, it was eternal." And it was true. The love story of James and Deanna Kelton became legend in Lordsburg, passed down through generations. The blacksmith who offered shelter to a frightened woman, and the woman who stayed and gave him everything. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried that legacy forward, building on the foundation of love and kindness that James and Deanna had established. The forge that James built still operated well into the 20th century, run by his descendants. The school where Deanna taught still stood, educating new generations of children. The house they built together became a historical landmark, preserved as an example of early New Mexico architecture, and as a monument to the love story that had unfolded within its walls. But more than the physical legacy, James and Deanna left behind something intangible but infinitely precious. They left proof that one act of kindness could change everything, that love could grow in the most unlikely places, that 2 broken people could heal each other and build something beautiful from the pieces. They left proof that sometimes, when you offer shelter for just one night, you might receive a lifetime in return. And in the end, that was the greatest gift of all.